Hello, everyone. I'm going to go ahead and record this one on Valentine's Day as well. It will be another uh, YouTube reaction, but it's for Mr. Ballen anyway. It's like scariest Bigfoot encounters, but I wanted to share something with you guys first. Um, some things that my fiance got for me. If I can figure out how to grab these things. Uh, she was so kind and got me a bouquet of roses. Wow. I do like roses, by the way. Since I got the COVIDs a while back. I can't really smell anything. Anyway, I really like those. It reminds me of my grandma. She used to grow roses. She got me cotton candy. Yes, I'm a cotton candy man. But I also like, so, okay. This is a normal, average-sized coffee mug, right? You know, I'm Pickle Rick, obviously. You know, I'm into the whole Rick and Morty franchise. But anyway, oh, God. You might see me, like, comically drinking out of this in some later videos. But, this is the mug that she got me. So, for comparison, like, look at the size of it. It's huge. Absolutely huge. I can fit my whole hand in there. It's absolutely huge. I love it. Hello, hello, hello. Anyway, so there's that. And I'm also a fan of chocolate as well. Ugh. Oh, God. Oh, the revenge of the coffee. You got a cold. That's a good thing. There's a little bit, only just a little bit left. Anyway, but I'm also a sucker for chocolates. So she got me this hysterically huge thing of chocolates. It's as big as my chest. But anyway, yes, I really love all that. I'm going to be eating on that for like a month. Not even lying. Not even lying. But anyway, without further ado, let's take a look at Scariest Bigfoot Attacks, the Ape Canyon and Mike Wooley story by Mr. Ballen. Good way to start off Valentine's Day. So, anyway, 3, 2, 1.
For at least 2 centuries, people have been claiming to see this tall,
big, hairy
ape
creature, yes,
all over the world, but mostly in North America. That creature is commonly referred to as Bigfoot. But despite the thousands of sightings that have occurred over the years and the nearly 400 news sightings of this supposed creature every year, there's never been any scientific proof that the creature actually exists. So while the legitimacy of these first-hand accounts is very much up for debate, and probably will be for some time, what's not up for debate is how absolutely terrifying some of these first-hand accounts are. And so what I did is I went out and found 2 of the most frightening encounters with Bigfoot, and I'm going to share those stories on today's video. But before we get into those 2 stories, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered
always a fan
format, then you've come to the right channel, because that's all I do, and I upload 3, 4, even 5 times every week. If that's of interest to you, I would encourage you to steal the
Bigfoot has always intrigued me, but
all of their alarms so they're late for work.
You just never know if he's
also please
truly real or not, you know?
Turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of my weekly uploads. All right, let's get into today's stories. In July of 1924, Fred Beck, along with 4 other gold prospectors, stumbled out of a forest right near Mount St. Helens in Washington state. And they swore to each other that they would not tell a soul what they had seen in the mountains the night before. But literally,
apparently someone slipped up.
Promise to each other, one of the men had spilled the beans at a bar. Very quickly, their story would garner major national media attention and even drew some international attention as well. This is their story. So the week leading up to the men arriving back in town with this crazy story, they had been prospecting for gold in an area they were very accustomed to working in. In fact, for the past 6 years, they had been going to this spot. So it was an area they knew well. And so this particular week that they were out there had been really successful. They had found a whole bunch of gold.
So it's an area that they were familiar with and hadn't seen anything before.
Unfortunately, one of the men named Fred Beck started complaining of a really bad toothache. Now, they're about 2 miles away from this town. It's very rugged terrain. It's not safe for someone to travel alone in case something were to happen. And so Fred needed one or all of these men to come back with him. None of them wanted to leave, but they were willing to compromise. And they said, let's stay here today, and then we'll leave first thing tomorrow morning. And so Fred didn't really have much of a choice, and so he agreed, and they spent the rest of the day prospecting for gold. When the sun started to go down, the men decided it was time to pack it in and head to their cabin. Now, because these men had worked in this area for the past 6 years, they had actually built a small log cabin centrally located in this area so they could just crash out there and continue to work and not need to commute out of the town. The cabin, though, was not built for comfort. It was built entirely for practicality. It was barely big enough to sleep all 5 men, and in fact, 2 of them had to sleep in the same bed, like right against one another, and then the other 3 had to sleep on the ground. There were no windows in this cabin. It was like this awful chamber that they were trapped inside of. But it was sturdy, it protected them from the elements, and it was enough because they were out there for work, not for pleasure. So as they're walking towards their tiny little cabin,
if you don't, some of you don't know, I used to work for a company that would tear down and rebuild old cabins and stuff like that.
The men stop, they look down. Now,
it's really fun. I enjoyed it.
Rugged mountain men that are accustomed to being out in the wild. They've had their fair share of run-ins with large predators, and so they quickly said, oh, that's a bear print. But upon closer inspection, as they're looking at this print, they noticed it was 19 inches long. That's way too big to be a bear print. And so they start speculating about what type of animal could make that print. As they're speculating, one of the men brings up that over the course of the week when he had been away from the group, a little ways away from the cabin, he had noticed a similar, not nearly as big, but a similar print. And when he had bent down to look at the print and inspect it to see what it was, he said he heard a whistling sound coming from the forest that was right next to him. And so he stood up and he looked, but he didn't see where the whistling was coming from. And he thought to himself, I don't know what animal makes that sound. So he's looking out, he can't see where the whistling's coming from, and then he hears whistling behind him. The same sound, but on the opposite side of him. And he turns around and he looks, and there's nothing over there as well. And he's trying to put together in his head what animal makes that sound. He knows it's not the people he's out there with because they were way over near the cabin and he could actually see them from where he was. And he starts getting this really uneasy feeling that whatever made this huge print is probably in the woods right now watching me, whistling at me. And so he abandons the print and heads back to camp, but was too embarrassed to bring the story up to the group in fear that they would think he was exaggerating, so he never brought it up. When this guy tells this story to the group, Fred Beck would say, that's weird, I heard whistling coming from the forest too. I thought it was you guys. They figured they were dealing with a large predator. They decide that it's in their best interest to forego a campfire outside the cabin, which they normally would do at night, and instead just go right inside the cabin and shut the door because they don't know what animals are out here and they want to be safe. So they're sitting inside their windowless little dark cabin and they start feeling pretty hungry. And they decide they want to boil some water to make food, but they don't have any water. Normally, when any of these guys went out to fetch water, they would go by themselves. The spring was not very far away from their cabin. They just walk out, scoop some water up, and come back. But because they were all feeling pretty uneasy, and they didn't know what this big animal was that was in their general vicinity,
might as well all travel together as a group.
With one of the other men, whose name was Hank, decide to go together and to bring their rifles just in case. Fred and Hank begin walking over to this stream that was only about 100 meters away from where they were. The moon was out, so there was a little bit of light coming from that, but it was mostly dark. And they're walking over to this stream, and all of a sudden Hank stops and raises his rifle up at the side of this embankment that was totally forested all the way up the side of the valley. Fred looks where Hank is aiming, and immediately he can tell what he's looking at. Standing a couple 100 meters up this mountain is this creature that's very tall, standing on two legs. It appears to be hairy, that's poking its head around a tree, and it's looking at them. They could only see it because the moon was casting light directly on it, so it was totally illuminated. As soon as Fred recognizes what they're looking at, the creature ducks back behind the tree. At the same time, Hank fires 3 shots in its general direction, and then there's silence. And then all of a sudden, it comes barreling out from behind the tree and is running straight down the mountain towards them, while whistling over its shoulder, looking like it's communicating with something behind it. Hank starts firing in its direction. It's clearly not striking this creature, but at some point the creature disappears. They don't know where it went. It's dark out. The only way they could see it before was because the moonlight happened to illuminate it. Now they don't know where it is. Fred and Hank abandon the water idea, and they run right back to the cabin. They jump inside, shut the door, and they start barricading the door shut. The other men are like, what the heck is going on? And they start explaining what happened. They didn't know if it was a person or if it was this creature. They heard that whistling sound. All the guys are spooked. And now they're barricaded inside of this tiny cabin, and it's totally dark. There's no windows, so they can't even see what's going on outside of the cabin. And so they just had to sit there and hope that this creature does not come anywhere near them. After a long period of total silence, the men start to feel like, okay, whatever that was, it's not coming back. It's late at night. Let's just try to get some sleep. And so the men all lay down and eventually doze off to sleep. Then at some point in the middle of the night, something smashes into the side of the cabin, causing them all to wake up. Hank's yelling out because a piece of wood that actually made up the cabin had come loose from whatever had hit the side of the cabin and fallen onto him. So the group gets up. There's a little bit of light coming through this now little crack in the wall from where this wood plank came out. They can see what's happening now. There's a little bit of light inside. They run over, they get this plank off of Hank, and as they're trying to kind of make sense of this chaotic moment, they start hearing what sounds like lots of people running around the outside of their cabin. Hank, who was closest to this little slat that had been created from one of the planks falling out, just turns his head to look out the slat. Because of the moon, there was a little bit of illumination, and when he looked out, he was horrified because he saw 3 creatures, these tall, ape-like creatures, the same one that Fred and Hank had been shooting at up over at the valley before. They're standing 10-15 meters away from the cabin, standing upright, looking at the cabin. They're holding these small boulders in their hands. And as Hank is looking through the slat, he's trying to get a little bit closer to get a better look. One of the creatures bends down and sees that Hank is looking at him, and he winds up and he throws the boulder and it smashes against this little slat. Hank basically falls over because he's trying to avoid this boulder being thrown at him, but the slat was small enough that it didn't go through. Hank's telling the rest of the men that there's 3 of them. There's 3 of them. They're right there. The men are grabbing their rifles. They're getting ready to aim out of the slat to try to take a shot at one of these creatures. But by the time they have a sight picture, there's no one out there, except they hear these footsteps, and they start hearing whistling coming from the other sides of the cabin where they have no way of seeing what's going on because there's no windows, and that gap in the cabin was only facing one way. And so they just sit there in silence as they hear all this whistling and footsteps and shuffling happening outside of their cabin. Then all of a sudden they hear slamming against the one door that leads into the cabin. They had barricaded the door already, so they go up and they're pressing back against the barricade as whatever is outside is trying to break into the cabin, but it can't get through the barricade. When they couldn't break in the front door, there was a barrage of these boulders smashing into the cabin. Now, these men had built the cabin. They knew it was sturdy, but they didn't know if it could withstand boulders hitting it. And so for hours, these rocks and boulders are smashing into the cabin. They never see them again through that slat. They kept periodically looking, and there was never any creatures that were on that side. It was like the creatures knew that they could be seen on that side, but couldn't be seen elsewhere. Finally, it just stops, and they sit down in the middle of the cabin. Fred was sitting in such a way that he could actually see the slat in the cabin that was now open and exposed. And as he's sitting there, Fred is horrified when he sees a hand slide into the cabin. A hairy, big ape hand that reaches in and starts fumbling around, grabs hold of an axe that was leaning up against the inside of the cabin. And as it's getting ready to pull it out, Fred runs over and twists the axe so it won't slide through the slat. And so the creature's slamming the axe, trying to get it out at the same time that Hank takes a shot and shoots right through the slat. The creature releases it and runs away. They hear all this whistling very close to their cabin, which made them realize that they had just been quietly waiting outside of their cabin. They had never left. But after Hank had taken that shot at the thing's hand, it sounded like almost a stampede was running away off into the forest. And at that point, the group was fairly certain that it was done. The next morning, when they saw through that slat in their cabin that the sun had finally come up, the men packed only the bare necessities. They got their weapons. When they finally opened up that door, all over the ground, all around the cabin were these rocks that clearly had been thrown at the cabin. The cabin itself had obviously withstood the barrage, but there was gash marks and slashes all over it. Feeling very lucky, the men start making their way out of the valley, and they make their way all the way back to town. And after the story kind of went viral, loads of people went out there to try to find these creatures, but no one ever could.
Damn.
In December of 1981, Mike Wooley decided he wanted to go deer hunting.
I can only imagine, man.
It was a cold day, it was great conditions for a hunt, and Mike had a deer stand that was set up about 1.5 miles down this old logging road that no one really used. He would take his truck and he would drive about halfway down that road, and then he'd get out and he would walk the remaining, half mile, 3/4 mile to his deer stand, because if he drove his truck in, he would scare away all the deer. He made it to his deer stand by about 3 p.m. that day, and he'd only been there for about 30 minutes when all of a sudden this young doe comes running across and stops right in front of his deer stand. The doe lays down and is clearly exhausted, and Mike would say that it looked like something was chasing it, and he assumed it was some huge buck. And so Mike's getting ready for this big buck to emerge, when out of the corner of his eye, he sees something pretty big jump out of a tree. And he kind of turns his head and looks, and it's not a buck. It looked like a gorilla. He thought, okay, a gorilla must have gotten out of the zoo. But then he's thinking to himself, there isn't a zoo around here, and there's no circus around here, so it can't be an escaped gorilla. And then he was like, okay, someone must have put on a gorilla suit to stop me from deer hunting. They're out here to try to get me to leave this spot. They're anti-deer hunting, and so they're here to screw with me. And so Mike, believing that was the case, he starts yelling to them, take off your mask. This isn't okay. This isn't funny. I have a license to be here. You can't be here. You need to leave. Like, get out of here. And so this thing that he believes is a person wearing a gorilla suit just completely does not react. It's just standing looking at him. And it's about 15 or 20 meters away from him at this time, and it's just staring at him. It's on 2 legs. Mike starts to feel uneasy because he's thinking to himself, if this is somebody in a gorilla suit that's trying to get me to leave, wouldn't they right now announce that and say, you need to leave? They wouldn't just stand there doing nothing. And so Mike, even though he knew it was going to probably escalate the situation, raises up his rifle in the direction of this person to use his scope to basically zoom in on this person and get a better look. And when he raises his rifle and he zooms in, he immediately knows that this is not a person wearing a mask. Steam was coming off of its face like it had been running. I mean, it was 30 degrees outside. And he said he could see its nostrils flaring like it was out of breath, or that perhaps it was angry. He didn't know. Even though it wasn't a person wearing a mask, it looked very human-like because it had human teeth, flat teeth. It had, he said, human eyelashes. And just the general structure of its face appeared to be human. And he thought to himself, is this a feral human? Is that possible? Is this a person that has been born and raised in the wild? And so as he's pointing the weapon at this creature, looking through the scope, just totally dumbfounded, Mike has no intention of shooting at this point. He really just wanted to stare at it. The creature roars, and Mike describes it as like a lion's roar. This thing was suddenly really upset with Mike. And Mike believed later on that it was because he raised his weapon at this thing. As soon as it roars, Mike said that about 100 meters in the other direction, he hears this really loud, piercing whistle coming through the forest. As soon as that whistle comes through the forest, the creature that was still growling stops and turns its head in the direction of this whistle, and it whistles back. And so Mike, I mean, the hair on the back of his neck is standing up. He knows they're communicating, probably about him. And as he's realizing this, he lowers his weapon and he's looking at the creature in front of him who's whistling and looking in the direction of this way. And then that creature snaps back and looks right at Mike. And as he's wondering what he should do next, another creature walks out of the tree line and stands right next to the first creature. And the way it walked, it was walking like a human. It was on 2 legs. And they're both standing about 20 meters away looking directly at Mike. Mike is terrified.
I would be too, man.
And so he leaps from his stand and starts running towards his truck, which is about a half mile away. And he said as soon as he did, he could tell that one of them at least started sprinting after him. And he looked over his shoulder as he's running towards the logging road, and he sees that one of the creatures is running parallel to him easily running as fast as he is. It's choosing to stay, 5-10 meters away from him, but running in step with him the whole way. It's like it's forcing him to leave the forest. And so Mike is running, waiting to get attacked by this creature. He finally gets to his truck, he clambers inside and shuts the doors, and he looks out of his window and he sees the creature just standing there looking at him from the trees. He looks in his rear view and he sees that the other creature had also been running after him on the logging road, that the two of them had basically herded him to his car. It was an intelligent move. Mike believes that because he raised his weapon at that first creature, that triggered a series of events that led to them chasing him out of the woods. He said that he was the aggressor, not the other way around. We don't know if either of those stories are true, but certainly they are terrifying. So I'd love to get a reaction to these two stories in the comments. Are these total fabrications, or is there some truth to Bigfoot? And these stories are just evidence of that. If you enjoyed today's story and you want to hear more like it, I would encourage you, if you haven't already, to steal the like button's phone and turn off all their alarms so they're late for work tomorrow. Also, subscribe to this channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss.
Why does he put so much hate on the subscribe button or the like button?
Drop
Why
it
would you do that?
Subreddit called Mr. Ballen. It's linked below in the description. If I intentionally use one of your story suggestions, I will absolutely credit you. If you want to get in touch with me, you can direct message me on Instagram. My username is JohnBallen416. I'm also very active on TikTok, where my handle is Mr. Ballen. So whether I see you on Reddit, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, or some combination, I just really appreciate your support. And until next time, guys, that's going to do it. See ya.
Yeah, like I said, Bigfoot thing, it's like, I don't know, it's one of those weird things that, we don't know if he really exists or not. So, I mean, it's really up to, speculation, is that right? Is that the right word? Well, anyway, if you guys like this kind of content, go ahead. Like, subscribe, and don't forget to check out our different memberships as well. And until next time, bye-bye! Hello, and welcome back to the channel. Today, we're going to be doing a reaction. Oh, wow, I can't hear myself. Today we're going to be doing a reaction to, perfect, okay, cool. I just wanted to make sure that my mic was, like, not flubbing up as usual. Scoot that. I'm sorry about that. I'm terrible at this. Crap. I really haven't done this in a while. Oh my gosh, my camera's terrible. I'm sorry, guys. Okay, I think we're better. Jordan's gonna, like, flay me for this.